The rope cut into Zelda Abbott's wrists as the men of Challies. Idaho dragged her through the muddy street toward the wooden post at the edge of town. And she knew this February night in 1883 would either kill her or break something inside her that could never be mended. The saloon owner's wife had accused her of stealing a silver locket, and though Zelda had protested her innocence until her voice went hoarse, no one believed a woman who worked cleaning floors and washing dishes had any honor worth defending. The judge, a portly man with tobacco-stained teeth, had declared her punishment without trial. She would be tied to the post outside of town for the night, exposed to the brutal mountain wind that swept down from the Sawtooth Range, a warning to anyone else who might think to steal from their betters. Zelda's thin cotton dress offered no protection against the biting cold as they bound her to the weathered post, her arms stretched behind her around the thick wood. Her dark hair whipped across her face as the wind picked up, carrying with it the promise of snow. She was 20 years old, and she had come to Idaho Territory seeking work after her parents died of fever back in Missouri. The frontier was supposed to offer opportunity, a chance to build something new, but instead she had found only hardship and cruelty. "Maybe this will teach you not to take what does not belong to you," the sheriff said, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. He was not a cruel man by nature, but he followed the law as he understood it, and the word of Mrs. Pemberton, the saloon owner's wife, carried weight in this town. "I did not take it," Zelda said through chattering teeth, but her words were lost in the wind. The men returned to town, leaving her alone in the darkness. The temperature continued to drop as night settled over the valley. Zelda's fingers went numb first, then her toes. She tried to keep moving, shifting her weight from foot to foot, but the ropes held her too tightly. The wind cut through her dress like knives, and she began to wonder if she would see the sunrise. Hours passed. The moon rose full and bright, casting silver light across the scrubland and illuminating the distant mountains. Zelda's consciousness began to drift, and she knew that was dangerous. Sleep in this cold meant death. She forced her eyes open, focused on the stars above, and prayed for morning. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her back from the edge of oblivion. At first, she thought she was dreaming, but the sound grew louder, more distinct. A horse and rider emerged from the darkness, moving slowly along the trail that led past the post. The rider pulled up short when he saw her, and Zelda heard him curse softly. "What in God's name?" the man said, dismounting quickly. He was tall, she could see that even in the moonlight, wearing a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat. He approached her cautiously, as if expecting a trap, but when he got close enough to see her face, his expression changed to one of shock and anger. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice rough but not unkind. He immediately began working at the knots that bound her wrists. "The town," Zelda managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "They said I stole something I did not." "Does not matter if you did or did not," the man said. "No one deserves this." The ropes fell away and Zelda's legs buckled. The stranger caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her as easily as if she weighed nothing. "Can you ride?" Zelda tried to answer but found she could not make her mouth work properly. The cold had stolen her ability to speak clearly. The man seemed to understand. He carried her to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding, and somehow managed to mount while still holding her. He settled her in front of him, wrapped his coat around them both, and turned the horse away from town. "You are free," he said simply, and those two words penetrated the fog in Zelda's mind more clearly than anything else. Free. She had not felt free in a very long time. They rode for what seemed like hours, though Zelda's sense of time had become unreliable. She drifted in and out of awareness, conscious only of the warmth of the man's body behind her and the steady rhythm of the horse's gait. Eventually they stopped, and the man dismounted, pulling her down gently. She saw they were at a small cabin nestled against the base of a rocky hillside. Smoke rose from the chimney, which struck her as odd until she realized someone else must be here. The door opened before they reached it, and an older man with a white beard stepped out, holding a lantern. "Cole, what have you brought home now?" he asked, but there was no anger in his voice, only concern. "Found her tied to a post outside Challies," the younger man, Cole, said. "Near frozen to death." "Bring her inside quickly now," the older man said, stepping back to let them pass. The warmth of the cabin hit Zelda like a physical force. There was a fire burning in the stone fireplace, and the single room was furnished simply but comfortably. The older man gestured to a chair near the fire, and Cole set Zelda down gently. She began to shake uncontrollably as her body tried to warm itself. "Get those wet clothes off her. She will catch her death," the older man said, already moving toward a trunk in the corner. He pulled out blankets and what looked like a heavy shirt. "Turn your back, boy. Give the lady some privacy." Cole turned immediately, facing the wall, while the older man helped Zelda out of her frozen dress. Her fingers were too numb to work the buttons, and she felt tears of frustration and shame slide down her cheeks. The older man was gentle and efficient, treating her with the same care he might show a daughter. He helped her into the warm shirt, which hung nearly to her knees, and wrapped her in blankets before settling her back in the chair. "You can turn around now, Cole," the older man said. "I will make some coffee." Cole turned slowly, and for the first time Zelda got a good look at her rescuer. He was perhaps 24 or 25, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He had a strong jaw shadowed with stubble and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily, though he was not smiling now. There was something solid about him, dependable, and Zelda found herself relaxing slightly despite her ordeal. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice stronger now. "You saved my life." Cole shook his head, "just did what anyone decent would do." He pulled another chair close to the fire and sat down, studying her face. "What is your name?" "Zelda Abbott," she said. "And yours?" "Cole Larkin," he replied. "That is my uncle, Thomas Larkin. We run cattle up in the high valleys during summer, but we winter down here." Thomas brought her a cup of coffee, heavily sweetened, and Zelda wrapped her hands around it gratefully. The warmth seeped into her palms, and she took a careful sip. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. "What did they say you stole?" Thomas asked, settling into a third chair with his own cup. Zelda told them the whole story. How she had been working at the saloon, cleaning and washing dishes for her room and board. How Mrs. Pemberton's silver locket had gone missing, and how the woman had immediately accused Zelda. How no one had listened when she protested her innocence. How the judge had sentenced her without a trial. How they had tied her to that post and left her to freeze. "I saw that locket 2 days later," Zelda said bitterly. "Mrs. Pemberton was wearing it. She found it in her jewelry box, right where she had left it. But by then I had already been punished, and no one saw fit to apologize or make amends." Cole's jaw tightened. "They should have cut you down the moment they realized their mistake. Should have never tied her up in the first place," Thomas muttered. "Challies used to be a decent town, but it has gotten mean. Too many people looking for someone to blame for their own troubles." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Zelda felt exhaustion pulling at her, but she was afraid to close her eyes, afraid this warmth and safety might disappear if she did. "You can sleep here tonight," Cole said, as if reading her thoughts. "Uncle Thomas and I will bed down in the barn. You take the bed there in the corner. In the morning we will figure out what comes next." "I cannot ask you to give up your bed," Zelda protested weakly. "You are not asking, I am offering," Cole said firmly. "Besides, I have slept in worse places than a warm barn." He stood and began pulling on his coat. "Come on, Uncle Thomas. Let us give Miss Abbott some peace." Thomas rose as well, pausing to bank the fire so it would burn through the night. "There is water in the pitcher if you need it," he told Zelda. "And do not worry about anyone coming here. We are a good 5 miles from town, and no one knows this cabin except friends." After they left, Zelda sat by the fire for a few more minutes, letting the warmth penetrate deep into her bones. Then she made her way to the narrow bed in the corner and crawled under the quilts. They smelled like wood smoke and sage, clean and honest smells. She was asleep before she could form another coherent thought. She woke to pale sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window and the smell of bacon frying. For a moment she could not remember where she was, but then it all came rushing back. The cold, the post, the rope cutting into her wrists. And Cole Larkin, appearing out of the darkness like an angel of mercy. Thomas was at the stove, tending a skillet. He looked over when he heard her stir and smiled. "Good morning, Miss Abbott. How are you feeling?" Zelda sat up slowly, taking inventory of her body. Her wrists were raw and bruised, her muscles ached, and her head felt stuffed with cotton, but she was alive. "Better than I have any right to feel," she said honestly. "Thank you again for taking me in." "No thanks needed," Thomas said. "Cole is out seeing to the horses, but he will be back shortly." "Are you hungry?" She was ravenous, she realized. She could not remember the last time she had eaten a proper meal. "Yes, very much so." Thomas served her a plate heaped with bacon, fried potatoes, and biscuits. Zelda ate slowly at first, mindful of her empty stomach, but the food was so good she could not help but pick up speed. She was mopping up the last of the grease with a biscuit when the door opened and Cole came in, stamping snow from his boots. "It started snowing about an hour ago," he announced. "Coming down pretty steady now." He hung his coat on a peg by the door and turned to look at Zelda, his expression softening. "You have some color back in your cheeks. That is good to see." "I feel much better," Zelda said. "Thanks to both of you." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been weighing on her mind since she woke. "What happens now? I cannot go back to Charlie's. They made it clear I am not welcome there." Cole and Thomas exchanged a glance. "You are welcome to stay here as long as you need," Thomas said. "Winter is not a good time to be traveling anyway, especially for a woman alone." "I cannot just live off your charity," Zelda protested. "I need to work to earn my keep." "There is plenty of work to be done," Cole said, pulling out a chair and sitting down. "Cooking, mending, keeping the place clean. Uncle Thomas and I are not exactly skilled at domestic chores. If you are willing to help with that, you will more than earn your keep." Zelda looked between them, searching for any sign of ulterior motives, but she saw only honest kindness in their faces. "All right," she said slowly, "but only until spring. Then I will move on, find work somewhere else." "Fair enough," Cole said, though something in his eyes suggested he was not entirely pleased with the idea of her leaving come spring. The days that followed fell into a comfortable pattern. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the valley in white and effectively cutting them off from town. Zelda threw herself into making the cabin more livable. She scrubbed and cleaned, organized their meager supplies, mended clothes that had been neglected for too long. She cooked meals that were far better than anything the two men had managed for themselves, using dried beans and salted meat, and whatever else she could find in their stores. Cole and Thomas spent their days seeing to the animals and making repairs around the property. They had a small herd of cattle sheltered in a draw nearby, and the horses needed constant attention. It was hard work, but both men seemed to thrive on it. In the evenings, they would gather by the fire. Thomas liked to whittle, creating small wooden figures with surprising skill. Cole would read aloud from one of the few books they owned, his voice steady and pleasant. Zelda would sew or knit, her hands busy while her mind wandered. She found herself watching Cole more than she probably should, noticing the way the firelight played across his features, the way his hands moved as he turned the pages, the rare smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. She was developing feelings for him, she realized with a start one evening about 2 weeks after her arrival. Real feelings, the kind that made her heart beat faster when he walked into the room and made her think about him when he was away. It was foolish, she told herself. She was a woman with nothing to her name, no family, no prospects. He was a rancher with property and a future. What could he possibly see in her? But sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, and she wondered if maybe, just maybe, he felt something too. One particularly cold night, with the wind howling outside and the snow piling up against the cabin walls, Thomas announced he was going to turn in early. "These old bones feel the cold more than they used to," he said, bundling himself in blankets on the cot he had claimed near the back wall. "You young people keep the fire going." Cole and Zelda were left alone by the fireplace. It was not the first time they had been alone together, but somehow tonight felt different, more charged, more significant. "Can I ask you something?" Cole said after a long silence. "Of course," Zelda replied, setting down her mending. "What were you planning to do before all this happened? Where were you trying to go?" Zelda thought about it. "I do not know," she admitted. "I came west because there was nothing left for me back in Missouri. My parents died within a week of each other, and I had no siblings, no other family. I thought maybe I could make a new life out here, but it has been harder than I expected." "It is hard country," Cole agreed, "but it is honest. If you are willing to work, you can build something real here." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You could stay, you know, not just until spring, permanently." Zelda's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Uncle Thomas and we have been talking. This cabin, the land, the cattle, it is a lot for 2 people to manage. We could use help. Real help, not just for a season but for the long term. We would pay you, of course, a fair wage and room and board." It was a practical offer, sensible and kind, and Zelda knew she should be grateful. But part of her had been hoping for something more personal, something that had less to do with work and more to do with the way her pulse raced when Cole smiled at her. "That is very generous," she said carefully. "I will think about it." Cole nodded, looking slightly disappointed, though he hid it quickly. "Of course. Take all the time you need." They sat in awkward silence for a few more minutes before Zelda excused herself and went to bed. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind and wondering what she really wanted. The answer came to her in the middle of the night, clear and certain. She wanted to stay, but not as an employee. She wanted to be part of something bigger, something permanent. She wanted to belong. And more than anything, she wanted Cole to see her not just as someone who needed rescuing, but as a woman worth loving. But how could she tell him that without risking the safety and security she had found here? If he did not feel the same way, if she had misread his glances and his kindness, she would have to leave. She could not stay in a place where her feelings were not returned. The pain would be too great. The snow finally stopped 3 days later, leaving the world covered in a thick white blanket. Cole and Thomas had to dig a path from the cabin to the barn, and the work kept them busy for most of the morning. Zelda made a big pot of stew and fresh bread, filling the cabin with warm, inviting smells. Over lunch, Thomas made an announcement. "I need to ride into Salmon City," he said. Salmon City was a larger town about 30 miles north, a 2-day journey in good weather. We are running low on some supplies that we cannot do without: salt, flour, ammunition. I will leave tomorrow morning. I will come with you, Cole said immediately. No need, Thomas replied. I know the route and I have made the trip 100 times. Besides, someone should stay here with Miss Abbott. Would not be proper to leave her alone for 4 days. Cole looked like he wanted to argue, but Zelda could see the sense in Thomas's words. All right, he agreed reluctantly. But you be careful. The snow will make the going slow. Thomas left the next morning before dawn, riding a sturdy mare and leading a pack horse. He promised to return within 4 days, 5 at the most if the weather turned bad again. Zelda and Cole stood in the doorway and watched him ride away, the horses moving carefully through the deep snow. Being alone with Cole felt different than it had when Thomas was sleeping in the corner. The cabin seemed smaller somehow, more intimate. Zelda busied herself with chores, trying not to think too hard about the fact that they were completely alone for the first time since he had rescued her. Cole seemed to feel the tension too. He spent most of the day outside, doing work that probably did not strictly need doing, staying away until the sun began to set. When he finally came back inside, his cheeks were red from the cold and his hair was dusted with snow. It is going to be a cold night, he said, stamping his feet and shedding his coat. The temperature is already dropping. Zelda had made chicken and dumplings using one of their precious hens that had stopped laying. She served it in wooden bowls and they ate in companionable silence. Afterward, Cole built up the fire while Zelda cleaned the dishes. When she turned back from the wash basin, she found him watching her with that expression again, the one she could not quite read. But this time, instead of looking away, he held her gaze. Zelda, he said, and the way he said her name, soft and full of meaning, made her heart pound. I need to tell you something. She dried her hands on a towel and moved closer to the fire to him. What is it? He stood, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she had come to recognize as nervousness. When I found you that night, tied to that post, something happened to me. I have been trying to figure out what it was, but I think I finally understand. He took a breath. I fell in love with you. Zelda felt her breath catch. Cole, I know it is too soon, he continued, the words tumbling out now like he had been holding them back for too long. I know you probably see me as just the man who helped you, nothing more, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel this way. You are brave and strong and beautiful, and I think about you all the time. I think about what it would be like to build a life with you, a real life. Not you as a hired hand, but as my partner, as my wife. There it was, laid bare between them. Zelda felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were good tears, joyful tears. You love me, she whispered. I do, Cole said simply. I know I have no right to expect you to feel the same way, especially after everything you have been through, but I had to tell you. I could not let you leave in the spring without knowing how I feel. Zelda crossed the small distance between them and took his hands in hers. They were rough and calloused from hard work, warm and strong. Cole Larkin, she said, looking up into his storm-gray eyes, I love you too. I have been trying not to, trying to be practical and sensible, but my heart does not care about practical or sensible. It only cares that you are good and kind, and that you saw me as someone worth saving when the rest of the world wanted to leave me to die. The smile that spread across his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. You mean it? He asked, sounding almost disbelieving. You really mean it? I mean it, Zelda confirmed. And then, before she could lose her courage, she stood on her toes and kissed him. For a moment, Cole seemed frozen with surprise, but then his arms came around her, and he was kissing her back with a passion that took her breath away. It was not a gentle kiss, or a careful one. It was a kiss full of longing and relief and joy, a kiss that promised everything and asked for nothing in return. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Marry me, Zelda Abbott. Not because you need protection or a place to stay, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Yes," Zelda said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." They stood there for a long time, holding each other, the fire crackling beside them and the cold night pressing against the windows. Zelda felt something she had not felt in years, safe, cherished, and completely at home. When Thomas returned 4 days later, loaded down with supplies and full of news from Salmon City, he took one look at their faces and grinned. "Well," he said, "I guess I missed something important." Cole stepped forward, his arm around Zelda's waist. "Uncle Thomas, I asked Zelda to marry me and she said yes." Thomas's grin widened. "About time, boy. I was wondering how long it was going to take you to work up the courage." He came forward and pulled Zelda into a fatherly hug. "Welcome to the family, my dear. You are exactly what this ranch needs, and what my nephew needs too." They decided to wait until spring to have a proper wedding. The circuit preacher came through Salmon City several times a year, and Thomas promised to ride up and fetch him when the weather cleared. In the meantime, they began planning for their future. The cabin would need to be expanded. They agreed. Cole and Thomas started sketching out plans for an addition that would give them a proper bedroom and more living space. They would need more furniture, more supplies, more of everything really. But these were good problems, happy problems. Zelda found herself thinking about what kind of life they could build together. Children, eventually, though that thought made her blush. A real home, with gardens and perhaps some chickens and a milk cow. Maybe they could expand the cattle operation, build up the herd. The possibilities seemed endless. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, the snow began to melt, and the world turned from white to brown to green. Wildflowers appeared in the meadows, and the cattle grew restless, eager to move to higher pastures. Thomas rode to Salmon City and returned with the preacher, a jovial man named Reverend Walsh, who seemed pleased to have an excuse to visit the remote ranch. They were married on a sunny April morning in 1883, standing outside the cabin with the mountains rising behind them. Thomas served as witness, and the ceremony was simple but beautiful. Zelda wore a dress that Thomas had bought for her in Salmon City, pale blue cotton with white lace at the collar. Cole wore his best shirt and pants, his dark hair slicked back, his eyes never leaving her face. When Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache in the best possible way. Thomas whooped and clapped, and even the preacher looked misty-eyed. They celebrated with a feast that Zelda had spent 2 days preparing. Roasted venison, fresh bread, apple pie made with dried apples, and a cake that was a bit lopsided but tasted wonderful. Reverend Walsh stayed the night, entertaining them with stories of his travels, and left the next morning with a full stomach and a generous donation to his church. Being married to Cole was everything Zelda had hoped for and more. He was a devoted husband, always thinking of her comfort and happiness. He consulted her on decisions about the ranch, valuing her opinion and often taking her advice. They worked side by side during the long summer days, moving the cattle to high pasture, mending fences, planting a garden. At night, they would lie together in their new bedroom, which Cole and Thomas had finished just before the wedding, and talk about their dreams. Cole wanted to expand the ranch, maybe buy more land. Zelda wanted to start a small business raising chickens and selling eggs to the mercantile in Challies. They both wanted children, a family to fill the cabin with laughter and noise. "You ever think about that night?" Cole asked her once on a warm evening in late summer. They were sitting on the porch they had built together, watching the sun set over the mountains. "The night I found you." "Sometimes," Zelda admitted, "but not with fear or anger anymore. I think about how close I came to dying, but I also think about how it led me here to you. If that night had not happened, we might never have met." "I prefer to think we would have found each other somehow," Cole said, pulling her close. "Some things are just meant to be." Zelda learned, gradually, to let go of the bitterness she felt toward the people of Challies. It was not easy. Sometimes when they rode into town for supplies, she would see Mrs. Pemberton or the sheriff, and old anger would flare up. But Cole was always there, a steady presence at her side, reminding her that the past was the past and they had a future to build. Eventually, word spread through Challies about what had happened. How the rancher Cole Larkin had married the woman they had left to die. Some people felt ashamed, though most never admitted it out loud. The sheriff came to the ranch one day, hat in hand, and offered a stiff apology. Zelda accepted it with grace, though she could see it cost him something to make it. Mrs. Pemberton never apologized. She left Challies that fall, moving back east with her husband, and Zelda was glad to see her go. That first winter as a married couple was magical. The ranch was snug and well prepared, with plenty of food and firewood. Zelda and Cole spent long evenings by the fire, reading or talking or simply sitting in comfortable silence. Thomas, ever tactful, often found reasons to take his supper in his own small room, giving them privacy. In the spring of 1884, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. She told Cole one morning over breakfast, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment he just stared at her, and then a grin spread across his face that was so wide and joyful she could not help but laugh. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby, we are," Zelda confirmed, and Cole swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. Thomas was thrilled at the news. He immediately began planning, building a cradle from smooth pine wood, carving little animals to hang above it. "This baby is going to need a proper grandfather," he declared, and Zelda felt tears of happiness at the way this man, who had no blood relation to her, had welcomed her so completely into his family. The pregnancy was not easy. Zelda was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down. Cole hovered over her constantly, worried and attentive. As she grew bigger, the summer heat became oppressive, and she found it hard to do the work she was used to. But through it all, she felt a deep sense of joy and anticipation. She was going to be a mother. She and Cole were going to have a child, a physical manifestation of their love. The baby came on a cold November night, earlier than expected. The nearest doctor was in Salmon City, too far away to fetch in time, so Thomas rode to Challies and brought back a midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Green, who had delivered half the babies in the valley. The labor was long and painful, and there were moments when Zelda was certain she could not go on. But Cole was there, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, and she drew strength from his presence. Finally, as dawn light began to creep through the windows, she heard a loud, angry cry. "It is a boy," Mrs. Green announced, holding up the squirming infant. "A fine, healthy boy." They named him Samuel Cole Larkin, but from the beginning everyone called him Sam. He had Cole's dark hair and Zelda's green eyes, and he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Cole held his son with a mixture of awe and terror, as if he could not quite believe this tiny person was real. "He is perfect," Cole whispered, looking up at Zelda with tears in his eyes. "You are perfect. Thank you." Thomas was equally smitten with his great-nephew, spending hours rocking the baby and telling him stories, even though Sam was far too young to understand. The cabin, which had seemed spacious just months before, suddenly felt crowded and lively in the best possible way. Motherhood changed Zelda in ways she had not expected. She was more protective, more fiercely determined to make the ranch succeed so that Sam would have security and opportunity. She was also more tired than she had ever been in her life, up at all hours nursing and soothing and changing diapers. But she would not have traded it for anything. As Sam grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Cole's hard work and smart management paid off, and they were able to expand their herd significantly. Zelda's egg business took off, and she was soon supplying not just Challies but several other small towns in the area. They hired a young man named Pete to help with the cattle, and later a woman named Sarah to help Zelda with the house and the chickens. In the spring of 1887, Zelda gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose Mary Larkin. She was a calmer baby than Sam had been, with blonde hair that surprised them both until Zelda remembered her mother had been blonde. Rose was adored by her older brother, who appointed himself her protector from the moment he met her. Thomas, now in his 60s, began to slow down. He spent more time in the cabin and less time out on the range, but he remained an integral part of their family. He taught Sam to whittle, just as he had taught Cole years before, and he would rock Rose for hours while singing old songs from his youth. One evening in the summer of 1888, as they all sat on the expanded porch watching Sam chase fireflies while Rose slept in Thomas's arms, Cole took Zelda's hand. "You remember what I said to you that night?" he asked. "The night I found you. You said I was free," Zelda replied. She had never forgotten those words, the way they had pierced through the cold and fear. "You were free," Cole said. "Free from that post, free from that town, free from people who did not value you the way you deserved to be valued. But I have been thinking lately that freedom is not just about escape. It is about having choices, about building the life you want with the people you love." He gestured to the ranch spread out before them, to Sam playing in the yard, to Rose sleeping peacefully, to Thomas smiling contentedly. "This is freedom too, is it not? This life we have built together." Zelda felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes," she said softly, "this is freedom. This is everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains, the same mountains that had witnessed Zelda's darkest hour, and now stood watch over her greatest happiness. She thought about the girl she had been, freezing and alone, and the woman she had become, surrounded by love and purpose. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1890, and they buried him on the hill behind the cabin, under a tall pine tree. His loss was deeply felt, but they took comfort in knowing he had died happy, surrounded by family. Sam grew into a strong, capable boy who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Rose was bright and curious, always asking questions and exploring. In 1891, Zelda gave birth to twin boys, James and Joseph, who kept the entire household on their toes with their energy and mischief. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Cole bought additional land, and they built a proper ranch house to accommodate their expanding family, though they kept the original cabin for sentimental reasons. Zelda's egg and chicken business evolved into a thriving poultry operation that employed several local women. They became pillars of the community, respected and valued. Cole served on the town council for several years, working to make Challies a more just and fair place. Zelda started a small school for ranch children who lived too far from town to attend regular classes. teaching them reading and arithmetic in the front room of their house, 3 days a week. On a warm evening in the summer of 1895, Cole and Zelda took a rare moment alone together, riding out to the spot where the old post had once stood. It had long since been torn down, but they both knew the place. Cole dismounted and helped Zelda down, and they stood together looking at the empty ground. 12 years, Zelda said. 12 years since that night. The best 12 years of my life, Cole replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Well, except for that one time when the twins decided to paint the barn with mud. That was not one of my best days. Zelda laughed, leaning back against his chest. They were just being creative. They were being terrors, Cole corrected, but there was nothing but love in his voice. But I would not change a thing. Not a single moment. Not even the hard parts, Zelda asked. They had faced their share of difficulties over the years. Harsh winters, cattle disease, crop failures, the normal struggles of building a life in a demanding land. Especially not the hard parts, Cole said firmly. The hard parts made us stronger. They made us appreciate what we have. He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. I meant what I said that night, Zelda. You are free. Free to be whoever you want to be, to live however you want to live. And you chose to be here with me. That is the greatest gift I could ever ask for. I chose love, Zelda said simply. I chose family. I chose home. And I would make the same choice every single day for the rest of my life. They stood there for a long time, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Two people who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and built something beautiful and lasting. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, while before them stretched a future full of possibility. In the years that followed, their children grew and thrived. Sam took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing a natural talent for the work. Rose proved to have a gift for teaching, and eventually took over the small school her mother had started, expanding it into a proper schoolhouse that served the entire valley. The twins, James and Joseph, were inseparable, and together they started a horse breeding program that became renowned throughout Idaho Territory. Zelda and Cole became grandparents in 1908, when Sam married a lovely young woman named Catherine, and they had a daughter. More grandchildren followed over the years, filling the ranch with new life and laughter. The original cabin, now weathered but still sturdy, was converted into a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, but Cole made sure it was always well maintained, a reminder of where they had started. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1908, Cole threw a huge celebration at the ranch. People came from all over the valley, former neighbors and new friends, employees and family. There was music and dancing, more food than anyone could eat, and speeches that made Zelda blush and laugh in equal measure. Late in the evening, when most of the guests had departed and only close family remained, Cole stood and raised his glass. I want to make a toast, he said, his voice still strong despite the gray in his hair. 25 years ago, I married the most remarkable woman I have ever known. She was brave when others were cruel, strong when she had every reason to be weak, and loving when she had every reason to be bitter. She taught me what it means to be truly free, to live with purpose and love with your whole heart. He looked at Zelda, his eyes as full of love as they had been on their wedding day. To my wife, my partner, my love, may we have 25 more years together, and then 25 after that. To Zelda, everyone chorused, raising their glasses. Zelda felt tears roll down her cheeks, happy tears that she made no effort to hide. She stood and went to Cole, kissing him in front of everyone, not caring who saw. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I will love you forever. Time continued its inevitable march. Idaho became a state in 1890, and Challies grew from a rough frontier town into a proper community with schools and churches and a future. The Wild West of Zelda's youth gradually gave way to a more settled, civilized world. But through all the changes, the ranch remained a constant, a place of hard work and deep love. Cole and Zelda grew old together, their hair turning silver, their movements slower but no less purposeful. They took great joy in their grandchildren, and eventually their great-grandchildren, watching the family they had created spread its roots deep into the Idaho soil. They never forgot that cold February night in 1883, when a cowboy on horseback had cut down a freezing woman and offered her freedom. It became a story told to children and grandchildren, a reminder that kindness matters, that love can grow in the most unlikely places, that one moment of compassion can change the course of a life. In the spring of 1920, Cole and Zelda took one last ride together to the place where the old post had been. They were both in their 70s now, but they still rode together whenever weather and health permitted. They stood together on that spot, hands clasped, looking out over the valley that had become their home. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had ridden a different trail that night?" Cole asked. "If I had not found you?" "No," Zelda said firmly, "because you did find me. That is all that matters. You found me, you saved me, you loved me. Everything else is just speculation." "I was the one who was saved," Cole said quietly. "Before I met you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You gave me purpose, a reason to build something lasting. You gave me a family, a legacy. You gave me everything." They rode back to the ranch slowly, savoring the spring sunshine and the sound of birds singing in the newly green trees. That night, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had gathered for Sunday supper, they sat at the head of the long table and looked around at the faces of the family they had created. Sam was there with his wife and their 3 children. Rose sat beside her husband, a doctor who had come to Challies from Boston and never left. The twins, both married now, sat with their growing families. The table was crowded and noisy, full of laughter and arguments and the beautiful chaos of a large, loving family. Cole reached for Zelda's hand under the table, squeezing it gently. She squeezed back, a silent communication that needed no words. They had built this. Together they had taken the ashes of tragedy and pain and created something beautiful and enduring. They had proven that freedom and love were not just abstract concepts, but concrete realities that could be built with hard work, devotion, and unwavering faith in each other. Years later, when both Cole and Zelda had passed on, peacefully and surrounded by family, their descendants would gather at the ranch and tell the story of how their family began. They would speak of a woman punished unjustly, left to die in the icy wind. They would speak of a cowboy who sheltered her and said, "You are free." And they would speak of the love that grew from that dark night, a love that had created a legacy that would endure for generations. The old cabin still stood, carefully preserved, a monument to where it all began. Visitors to the ranch would often pause there, touching the weathered wood, imagining that cold February night so long ago. And if they listened carefully, in the quiet moments when the wind whispered through the valley, they could almost hear the echo of those 2 simple words that had changed everything. "You are free." The ranch that Cole and Zelda built continued to thrive, passing from generation to generation, each adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the foundation that had been laid. The original brand that Cole had designed, a simple CL with a heart between the letters, was still burned into the side of every animal born on the property, a reminder that this was a place built on love as much as hard work. In the family Bible that sat in the parlor of the big house, on the first page, someone had carefully written the story in neat script. It began with the words, "She was punished and left in the icy wind. The cowboy sheltered her and said, 'You are free,' and from that freedom this family was born." It was a story of redemption and love, of cruelty overcome by kindness, of two people who found each other in the darkest of circumstances and chose to build a life together. It was a story that would be told for as long as the mountains stood and the wind blew through the valley, a testament to the enduring power of love and the courage it takes to offer freedom and the wisdom it takes to accept it. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when their time on earth is done, Cole and Zelda Larkin walked hand in hand through endless meadows, still together, still in love, still free.